Now, you can't decide where your kid's going to school. You can't decide whether or not they can move a halfway house for drug users next door to you or whatnot.
It's out of your control. The government decides that.
That's right. The government decides too many things. They decide also how your children are to be raised. You may have an idea about at what age children should be introduced to sex, and in what manner, with what kind of moral commitments.
You mean as a parent?
As a parent, yes. The schools have taken that over. By the time you even think about it, they've already had years, of showing.
They're passing out condoms to these kids.
Passing out condoms is not even the half of it. They're showing motion pictures of naked couples engaging in sex, both homosexual and heterosexual, in the 7th grade. And if you complain about it, that's considered to be censorship.
My name is Noah Schwartz. My pronouns are he, they. We got to set clear expectations for our future board members, And first, I'd like to say you guys are doing a great job of dismantling systems of oppression. And there's no greater source of systematic oppression than the nuclear family. The nuclear family is associated with whiteness. And whiteness is associated with racism, bigotry, transphobia, and white supremacy. Just look at these QAnon, Trump-supporting parents protesting at your meetings. Oh, I don't want my kid to get vaccinated. I don't want my kid to wear a mask. Why is my kindergartner taking puberty blockers? Why is there a urinal in the girls' room? Well, you're a domestic terrorist, and you need to be investigated by the FBI. Racism, bigotry, and hatred have no place in our schools, and quite frankly, I don't understand why you're still allowing parents to speak here. And to all the parents who feel that they have the right to be involved in their kids' education, well, you're a white supremacist, and your children need to be taken away from you so that we can create a more tolerant and inclusive society. Furthermore, Cuties on Netflix should be required viewing for all elementary school students. The tradition of raising children is outdated and obsolete. And our children, they need to be groomed instead. Groomed to be tolerant, loving, anti-racist, and comfortable with their gender fluidity. Thank you for hearing me out on why we need to dismantle the patriarchy, dismantle oppression, dismantle whiteness, and most importantly, dismantle the nuclear family. The New World Order that we are trying to create starts with our children. Thank you.
Reasons our children do not measure up academically to children in other countries is that so much time is spent in American classrooms twisting our history for ideological purposes. How would you feel if you were a Native American who saw the European invaders taking away your land? Is the kind of question our children are likely to be confronted with in our schools. It is a classic example of trying to look at the past with the assumptions and the ignorance of the present. One of the things we take for granted today is that it is wrong to take other people's land by force. Neither American Indians nor the European invaders believed that. Both took other people's land by force, as did Asians, Africans, Arabs, Polynesians, and others. The Indians no doubt regretted losing so many battles, but that is wholly different from saying that they thought battles were the wrong way to settle the question of who would control the land. Today's child cannot possibly put himself or herself in the mindset of Indians centuries ago without infinitely more knowledge of history than our schools have ever taught. Nor is understanding history the purpose of such questions. The purpose is to score points against Western society. In short, propaganda has replaced education as the goal of too many educators. Schools are not the only institutions that twist history to score ideological points. "Never forget that they owned lots of slaves," was the huge headline across the front page of the New York Times Book Review section in its December 14, 2004 issue. Inside was an indictment of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Of all the tragic facts about the history of slavery, the most astonishing to an American today is that, although slavery was a worldwide institution for thousands of years, nowhere in the world was slavery a controversial issue prior to the 18th century. People of every race and color were enslaved, and enslaved others. White people were still being bought and sold as slaves in the Ottoman Empire, decades after American blacks were freed. Everyone hated the idea of being a slave, but few had any qualms about enslaving others. Slavery was just not an issue, not even among intellectuals, much less among political leaders, until the 18th century, and then it was an issue only in Western civilization. Among those who turned against slavery in the 18th century were George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, and other American leaders. You could research all of 18th century Africa or Asia or the Middle East without finding any comparable rejection of slavery there. But who is singled out for scathing criticism today? American leaders of the 18th century. Deciding that slavery was wrong was much easier than deciding what to do with millions of people from another continent, of another race, and without any historical preparation for living as free citizens in a society like that of the United States, where they were 20% of the total population. It is clear from the private correspondence of Washington, Jefferson, and many others that their moral rejection of slavery was unambiguous, but the practical question of what to do now had them baffled. That would remain so for more than half a century. In 1862, a ship carrying slaves from Africa to Cuba, in violation of a ban on the international slave trade, was captured on the high seas by the U.S. Navy. The crew were imprisoned, and the captain was hanged in the United States, despite the fact that slavery itself was still legal at the time in Africa, in Cuba, and in the United States. What does this tell us? That enslaving people was considered an abomination, but what to do with millions of people who were already enslaved was not equally clear. That question was finally answered by a war in which one life was lost for every 6 people freed. Maybe that was the only answer, but don't pretend today that it was an easy answer, or that those who grappled with the dilemma in the 18th century were some special villains, when most leaders and most people around the world at that time saw nothing wrong with slavery. Incidentally, the September 2004 issue of National Geographic had an article about the millions of people still enslaved around the world right now. But where was the moral indignation about that?